Our top story for tonight. The NFL schedule has dropped since the last player profiler today, and I'm Bradley Stalder here to get you covered on some of the biggest winners and losers of the NFL schedule being dropped. We generally know who the main matchups are every year. Depends on the playoffs, depends on the division, and the NFL goes through a rotation to ensure that every few years, every opponent is played. But we finally have the NFL schedule at our fingertips, and we can start to use this at our advantage for drafting our best ball teams, especially as we talk about the playoffs. I'm going to dive into specific winners and losers team wise, and also offer a few players that you should be targeting or avoiding based on these matchups. But if you want an even more in-depth best ball perspective, check out the Player Profiler YouTube channel tonight at 8 p.m. This is Thursday, May 16th. So in about 1 hour from now, I will be with Adam Krautwurst to dive deeper into the best ball ramifications. But tonight, I'm going to be looking specifically at team winners and losers for their schedule. All of that and more right after this. Hey, y'all. Bradley Stalder here. We're going to discuss the NFL schedule. We're going to talk about some team winners and losers. We're going to start with a few teams that have schedules that I would consider easy, or they are treated in such a way that the NFL characterized them as a bad team last year. That's one of the nuances of the schedule, is that typically if teams were bad last year, then the NFL wants to give them a relatively easier schedule. And if teams make the playoffs and performed well in the previous year, those teams typically get a more difficult schedule. And while those teams, that get tough schedules may be able to continue to elevate, because frankly, us as the NFL fans want to see matchups that get into shootouts or have a great narrative. And typically good teams are ones that have these competing narratives that drive interest in NFL games. So that's what we're going to see, is these playoff teams continue to have other playoff teams, either past or what we anticipate to be future playoff teams, that they are matching up with. However, there are a few teams that we need to be paying attention to that have kind of gotten a good deal. The first is that the Arizona Cardinals have, in my opinion, a weak schedule after their bye week, except for San Francisco. So Arizona, after the bye, goes Seattle, at Seattle, at Minnesota, hosting Seattle, and then they get New England, at Carolina, at the LA Rams, and then San Francisco. So Seattle was bad last year, not very good last year. We anticipate that there may be some bounce back. There is a new head coach, new offensive coordinator for Seattle. Maybe it's after the bye that things come together, but Arizona has a pathway to be competitive interdivisionally, and then they round out, especially week 15, 16, New England, and then at Carolina. So this is one of those schedules that Arizona, if they are 500 or so throughout the first 10 weeks, if they're 5-5, 6-4, 4-6, they've got to be looking at the back end of the schedule and saying, you know what, these are some interdivisional games. They're going to be tough matchups, but we can especially, go to Carolina and win and stay there. They've traveled to the East Coast from Seattle to New England week 14, 15. Or they're hosting New England, and then they travel to Carolina. So they've got home field advantage for New England, and they go to Carolina. And yes, we think Carolina is going to be better, But Arizona has Marvin Harrison. They've got a healthy Kyler. They've got Trey McBride. They've got an offense that is rejuvenated, and their defense as well. So we could also be looking at a week 18 that doesn't matter for Arizona. If San Francisco has a lot of things locked up, that is something that we should take into consideration. This last week, week 18, is kind of a big deal for many of these teams. And so Arizona is one of those teams that a lot of things can fall 500. And then if they finish strong, right, they're a team that could really benefit from the back half of the schedule. There are a few other teams that have what I would consider weak schedules overall. And another one is Atlanta. So Atlanta starts Pittsburgh, which we have lots of questions about Pittsburgh, at Philly. Okay. Yes, that's a tough matchup. They host Kansas City, and they host New Orleans. They host Tampa Bay. So we've got 4 home games in the first 5 weeks, in domes with this new offense, Bijan Robinson, Drake London, Kyle Pitts. And then, you fast forward, we've got Seattle, Tampa Bay, Dallas, New Orleans, Denver. Like, tell me, none of those teams scare you. Then we get the bye. You could be looking at a 7-4 start for the Atlanta Falcons. And then we get the LA Chargers, Minnesota Vikings, Vegas Raiders, Giants, Washington, Carolina. You can't tell me that this isn't a team that can go 11-6 given this matchup. A lot of things can fall the right way for the Atlanta Falcons. And so, like, looking at how just throughout the entirety of the schedule, it seems like the NFL viewed Atlanta as a bad team. And yes, Atlanta did pick Michael Penix, which was a head scratcher. But the reality is this schedule sets up very well to be winnable games every single week. There isn't really one when you get past Philly and Kansas City that you're like, well, I don't know if they can compete in this game. And, they're still going to give some shootout potential to Philly and Kansas City. But the rest of the way, all of these games are winnable in some form or fashion for Atlanta. So they're being treated like a very bad team. And I think this is a folly. We want to be, we need to look at what the overs under are for Atlanta, but I would tend to take the overs. I think that a lot of games can fall the right way for the Atlanta Falcons. Another team that is treated like a bad team is the Cleveland Browns, right? Looking at their schedule, yes, they usually have these tough divisional opponents like Baltimore, Cincinnati, right? Pittsburgh, they always play tough. But look at the rest of their schedule. You get Jacksonville, Dallas, the Giants, the Raiders, Washington. Through the first 5 weeks, are you really scared of any of those matchups? The answer is no. We may have questions overall of whether Cleveland is going to be a good team in 2024. The jury's out. The jury's out on Deshaun Watson in particular. Joe Flacco showed us what he could do offensively for Amari Cooper and David Njoku. But the Cleveland Browns are set up with a very nice schedule to start. And then what's very interesting for us as fantasy, enthusiasts, fantasy players, is the shootout schedule. And Adam Krautwurst and I are going to dive deeper into the nuances of the week 15, 16, 17. But if you're looking for a nice shootout schedule team, Cleveland hosts Kansas City, plays at Cincinnati, and hosts Miami. Those are games that, yes, sure, you're going to host in Cleveland. That may be an ugly game week 17, but all of the offenses are ones that can put up points pretty quickly. Cincinnati, you got Burrow, you've got Mahomes, and you've got Tua with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, and now Odell Beckham. So we really like the Cleveland schedule as one that is very favorable and is not one that you would think a team that made the playoffs last year would be getting. Nevertheless, Cleveland is a team that has a favorable schedule. The last one that's treated like a bad team is the New York Jets, right? You've got San Francisco kicking off. Aaron Rodgers returns at San Fran. But look at the rest of the schedule. You've got Tennessee, which has major questions. You've got New England and Denver and Minnesota. You're hosting New England, Denver, Minnesota, Buffalo, 4 consecutive home games. And then you're at Pittsburgh, at New England, hosting Houston, at Arizona, hosting Indy, and then you get your bye. There's a pathway to, before the bye, you've got 11 weeks to be 7-4. And you're going into the bye, and you're feeling, the Jets had to be feeling pretty good about that pathway. And then ending the season with Seattle, which, as I said, a wide range of outcomes. There's a lot of positivity based on the new offensive coordinator. Seattle can't get any worse from last year, but also, are they just going to be stuck in Geno Smith purgatory? At Miami, at Jacksonville, they host the Rams, at Buffalo, week 17. That could be a snowstorm. So while not a shootout fantasy football schedule to end, the fantasy season, certainly the Jets are in a good spot to be putting up lots of wins, especially if the defense can lock down and Aaron Rodgers can be efficient. This is a team that is one of great interest. So there are a few teams like that I feel are mispriced based on who the matchups are so far. So I'm going to dive into a couple more winners, and then I'm going to look at some losers team-wise from the NFL schedule. But before we do that, a word from our sponsors.
It is NFL draft season and the wait is over. The Player Profiler Rookie Guide is available. It's live on the site now. Right there in the nav bar, click on the 2024 Rookie Guide to download it. It's so comprehensive. We're ranking and writing up more players than anybody. And this year, we're providing athleticism scores. We're doubling the number of advanced stats on each player profile. And guess who's back? Cody Carpentier. But it's not just him. It's Theo. It's Matty Kiwoom. It's John Lobb. And the Undroppables, all coming together to provide their composite rankings. And this year we're adding Superflex Tight End Premium because that's now become such a popular format. So get those composite ranks, get the write-ups, the comps, the stats and metrics you want. If you already have Dynasty Lux, you already have it. But if you don't, it's right there in the nav bar on playerprofiler.com. It's $20. It's not the first. It's not the most expensive, but it is the best.
That's right. The Rookie Guide is the best. The rookie draft just happened a couple weeks ago, and the NFL draft coverage that Player Profiler put on was the best in the industry. So make sure you are checking out all of the rookie profiles as you're doing your rookie dynasty drafts, as you are using all of the Player Profiler tools to plan out your maybe dynasty startup drafts. You want to know where the rookies are falling. All of these are important tools at your disposal that we've created. Some of them are free. So make sure you are checking out all of that and more on the Player Profiler channel. We're going to get into some losers in the NFL schedule realm. The first loser I want to mention, and I kind of hinted at this a little bit, is the Miami Dolphins. And Miami gets, they get Jacksonville to start, Buffalo, at Seattle, they host Tennessee, at New England, and then their bye. So their bye is very early this year. At Indy, then Arizona, at Buffalo, at the LA Rams. The Vegas Raiders come to Miami. New England goes to Miami. They go to Green Bay in week 13, Thanksgiving. Ooh, that could be very cold for Miami already. Week 13 at Green Bay. And then you host the Jets at Houston, host San Francisco, but then, and this is where Miami is probably going to be close to 500 throughout the season. That's just how we've seen things play out for the Dolphins. They've won some, they've lost some. Unfortunately, McDaniel does struggle to respond to adversity. So they may start strong. We may see, Miami start, 4-1, right, to kick off the season, and then they get their bye, and then it's, well, other teams are going to be playing catch up. Is Miami able to look at the film, review, and make the changes? We're not sure based on the past Miami Dolphins performances, but what we do know is Tua struggles. Tua majorly struggles, in particular near the end of the season. And then we look at what is the location of the Miami games, week 17, week 18 at Cleveland and at the New York Jets. We're talking end of December, January, outdoors. We remember week 17 a couple years ago when New Orleans traveled to Cleveland and it was an absolute snowstorm, a disaster zone. And yes, weather can vary from year to year, but when we think about what works for the Miami Dolphins, it's speed and elusiveness and scheme. And when the weather can impact the little moves that the Tyreek Hills and Jalen Waddles of the world use to get open, that can be a major problem for a player like Tua, who, yes, he can be accurate close to the line of scrimmage, but Tyreek Hill needs some space down the field. Or if he's going to make a move close to the line of scrimmage, you don't want him slipping. And so our concern is that these games may not be the shootouts that you want from a fantasy perspective. It's also going to be really tough for them to win with speed in those environments overall. So you're running with your Achans, your Mosterts, your Jalen Wrights. The formula is going to have to be focused more on scheme than speed. And that the speed is what is winning for the Miami Dolphins. That's what's won for them in the past, and that's what their their schedule reveal was focused on. Rewatch the Miami Dolphins schedule reveal. It's all focused on how fast they are. So we want to be fading the Miami Dolphins a little bit in terms of how difficult their matchups are. Another one I would say is Dallas. And Dallas is a tough one to say that they're necessarily losers, but you never see Dallas have an easy schedule. You never see the Dallas Cowboys get a cakewalk. And yes, they do have like regularly scheduled meetings with Washington, which they pick second for a reason. And Dan Quinn maybe wasn't the sharpest, hire in terms of like long-term success, but short-term success, like Dan Quinn had wins for the Atlanta Falcons when he was head coach just a few years ago. And so Dallas at Cleveland, not a gimme. New Orleans, Baltimore, the Giants, Pittsburgh, then they get Detroit and then the bye. You could be looking at a 3-3 Dallas Cowboys team at the bye, and things could not be looking very good. And then you right out of the bye at San Francisco and then at Atlanta, hosting Philly. Talk about two tough matchups in a row. And then you get Houston again in week 11. Finally, you get a reprieve with a nice little ending. You've got a few nice matchups near the end for Dallas. But as I said, nothing is guaranteed. We saw how Dallas got smacked by Green Bay in the playoffs when Dallas was a heavy favorite. They were the second seed. And Green Bay seemingly came out of nowhere and just smacked them. And so we see in week 12 at Washington, then hosting the Giants, and then hosting Cincinnati, at Carolina, Tampa Bay, at Philly. So week 17, Dallas, Philly. Oh, baby. Like for our best ball teams, we want that. We want to be targeting Dallas and Philly. Boom, boom, boom. But then, that's a tough matchup to win, though, for the Dallas Cowboys. Week 17, that's going to prove whether or not they deserve to even make the playoffs. And then Washington in week 18. And some of these weak teams in week 18, I don't want to put too much weight into them because Dallas might not be playing for anything, but Washington might be playing for a spoiler. Who knows? And by that time too, they've got nothing left to lose. So they'll just throw everything they have. So the reality is there aren't a lot of gimmies. Yes, you've got the Giants a couple times and Washington a couple times, but the rest of the schedule is packed with some really difficult matchups for Dallas. So look for the Dallas Cowboys to be one of those teams that they're probably going to finish 500, and without a clear number 2 option behind CD Lamb, and Ezekiel Elliott is your running back 1 at least today, May 16th. Zeke or Rico Dowdle. right? There's a real lacking of offensive weapons to keep up in Dallas. And so our concern is from an NFL perspective, these are not just a lot of cakewalk matchups that Dallas is walking into. So look for the Dallas Cowboys to be one of those teams that we do worry about. How does the schedule impact them? Are there going to be some more shootouts? Maybe. That would be great for our fantasy teams. I don't think this scares us away from a fantasy football perspective, but from a real life NFL perspective, the NFL schedulers did not cut a lot of slack for the Dallas Cowboys in 2024. Another quote unquote loser, and I wouldn't call them losers, but you have to recognize that Detroit has a really difficult schedule as well. Let's just read through it and tell me, like, you can tell me these are not easy matchups. They start hosting the Rams, and then they play Tampa, two playoff teams. And I just talked about how Arizona has some really nice weapons. That's not a cakewalk team. And Seattle could be surprising us, right? There's a wide range of outcomes I mentioned for Seattle. And then you get your bye very early. And for teams like that, that's tough. Now, there is a positive in this overall difficult schedule for Detroit. Jared Goff plays a lot of games. I think he plays 11 games in domes this year. That's phenomenal. But post bye at Dallas, at Minnesota, you get a Tennessee team that can get into shootouts, at Green Bay, at Houston, right? Green Bay, Houston, playoff teams. Jacksonville was almost a playoff team last year. Indy was almost a playoff team last year. Chicago is completely revamped. Green Bay again. You get Buffalo, at Chicago, at San Francisco, Minnesota. As I said, Detroit, if they get to the playoffs and repeat success, they're going to have to do it with a much more difficult schedule this year. They're going to have to earn it more. So, like, Detroit fans, yes, like they're very excited. I live a couple minutes outside Detroit. They're elated about all the success they experienced last year, but this is a much more tough sledding for the Lions. They're gonna have to dig deep and utilize a lot of the additions that they put in the draft. They're going to have to lean on the development of Jahmyr Gibbs, and Jared Goff just signed his massive extension. Amon-Ra as well, and Penei Sewell. All of those core pieces are going to have to stay healthy for the whole season for Detroit to mirror the run that they had last year. So that's it's hard to repeat the success with what I would consider a lot of 50-50 games, like coin flip games, because Detroit, I think, is a very good team, but they're facing a lot of other very good teams this year. Okay, a few others. I'd still say Carolina, as much as we don't want to harp on like bad teams staying bad. Carolina still has a tough schedule, especially near the end. So Carolina post-bye. This is the post-bye Carolina schedule. Okay. They have Kansas City week 12, Tampa Bay, at Philly, hosting Dallas. Man, that is 4 games in a row of just, it could get ugly for Carolina quickly. And then you get Arizona, which I've been very positive about lately. And then you get Tampa again after the bye at home. Like the Tampa Bay hosts Carolina, and then Atlanta hosts Carolina. So you have a really tough end of the season matchup. So even if Carolina starts strong and has a good run out of the gate, man, that post bye, you're going to hope for some things to fall the right way. You're going to have to hope for Tampa Bay to be falling apart a little bit and getting old, like with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. You're going to hope that Philly, gets caught off guard, that Dallas implodes. Arizona is not what, they're hoping to be. Tampa Bay again, and Atlanta. So there's going to be a lot of upsets. If Carolina wants to see success again, they're going to be stuck in this picking early purgatory again because of the back end of the season. Now, the front end, there's a lot of 50-50 games. New Orleans, 50-50-ish. Vegas, it's in Vegas, though. Chicago, right? Washington, Denver, New Orleans again. those are games where maybe it's not exactly a coin flip, but they're probably pretty close. So we could see Carolina having maybe a strong beginning of the season and then petering out near the end, given what we've seen so far. All right, I'm going to give you one more team take, and that is that Chicago. We like what Chicago's done this offseason, but Chicago ends the season with Detroit, at San Francisco, at Minnesota. They host Detroit. They host Seattle week 17, and then at Green Bay. So we're looking at 4 of the last 6 games are on the road. And those are not easy. It's not easy matchups. So even if you have positivity coming from Chicago because of Keenan Allen and Gerald Everett, right, and DJ Moore and Caleb Williams and Roma Dunze, right, Cole Kmet and DeAndre Swifts, right, that's going to be a really difficult set of matchups for them to win. And look, if they prove that their strong start to the season, they could knock off a Tennessee team, they can knock off Indy, they can knock off Carolina and Jacksonville and Washington. You know, we could look through week 8 and see them be 4-3 or 3-4 and be pretty close to 500. But the rest of the way, as I said, you're getting some games on the road, 3 consecutive ones at Detroit, at San Francisco, at Miami, and then week 18 at Green Bay, that could prove ruthless for the Chicago Bears, who have a lot of optimism around their team and rebuilding around Caleb Williams. That's probably going to be do or die for Caleb. Like that 3-game stretch at Detroit, at San Francisco, at Minnesota, that will determine whether Chicago is for real or not. Because I think that leading up to that stretch of 3 games, they're going to be roughly 500. So those are some takeaways. Those are some winners and losers. If you like the content and found this helpful, make sure you follow me on Twitter at FFStalder. Make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel, Player Profiler News. Go to playerprofiler.com/news and bookmark that on your desktop. Use the bookmark application on your phone, and you'll be able to keep that as the stream. All of that, and our content creators have been crushing it in terms of what player updates exist for teams, for players. We've got some videos. Jeremiah Retzlaff has been putting videos. Emerson Beery has been putting videos. Mike Lindbergh, Brendan Booth, Johnny, and many, many more have been putting videos on the stream in addition to all of the news blurbs. So make sure you're checking out playerprofiler.com/news for the latest updates on these players. It's great. Make sure you guys are checking out all the good things that Player Profiler is putting on. I will be on the Player Profiler channel, the home channel, in about 30 minutes to discuss the shootout schedule, targets, and fades with my guest, Adam Krautwurst, on the Stack Hunters podcast. Until next time, everyone, good luck in your fantasy drafts.
Hey, I want to take a moment to thank you for tuning in. It's important to me that all of our media be free. This is only possible because of you allowing a true independent sports media enterprise to thrive unlike any other in the business. So please subscribe to the All In Package to continue to make all of this possible, to ensure that all of our stats, information, data, content is available to you, especially you, the people that get the site and get the show.